Hey, Ohio, welcome once again to the Retirement Blueprint Show with Tim Lofton of Axum Planning and Wealth. I'm Spike Spangle. Every single week, we like to help you with retirement planning strategies and solutions. Tim Lofton, what's on your mind this week?
Behavioral finance, Spike.
I love this.
I mean, nothing is more exciting. If you're watching this right now and you're like, I don't know what you just said, do not change the channel. This is actually interesting.
It's fascinating.
It is.
Fascinating. It's stuff that I've enjoyed studying. You have passed me some great books and literature. Behavioral finance is the study of how we make decisions when it comes to our finances, our money. And Tim, would you not say that money is very, very personal, and especially the way we learn about it and treat it?
Well, listen, so much of our information, I've been studying generational psychology for 30 years, and so much of our belief system has been passed down to us. You know, you look at Depression-era raised kids, World War II generation raised kids. Even for me, the things that were passed down, the fears, the concerns, what we believe is to be the status quo, how things work, are things that we make decisions based on that information. And a lot of times that information is flawed, Spike.
And it's how we make investment decisions based on what we've watched on the news.
Right.
Sitting around the water cooler, talking to our neighbors, talking to our family, talking to our parents and grandparents.
Fear and life experience.
Fear and life experience.
And positive things, too.
Right, but is that life experience always correct? And how exactly do we make that decision? So I want to talk about some of those biases, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Some of them might sound very familiar to you. We'll get to some of those later. But concepts, and we'll do this throughout this segment here, anchoring bias, confirmation bias, loss aversion bias. Now, why am I saying biases? So, gentlemen, Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman, Tversky, a lot of them, they had won a Nobel Prize several decades ago on all of this behavioral finance. It is an actual science field.
And it is a thing.
It is just like our sciences and our psychologies that we study there, but the emotions behind our decision making.
And a lot of this will feel Pavlovian. And so we know the Pavlovian, you know, ring the bell, feed the dog, ring the bell, feed the dog, we ring the bell, my dog's sitting there. And I can tell you 100% that that's a real thing, because every morning at 9 a.m., my dogs start whining because they know it is time. They are ringing their own bell.
Right. Now, let's start out then with anchoring bias.
Yeah.
Is anchoring bias, I thought of things like the home. The definition of it is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information and sticking with that, literally anchoring ourselves to that decision. Right. What about a real-life example?
Sure. So when we think about anchoring biases, I'll give you an example of a couple clients. We had one client that retired from General Electric, one that retired from Procter & Gamble at almost the same time. Both of their portfolios were made up almost 90% of the company's stock that they retired from. And so my conversation was, hey, are we willing to bet your entire retirement and the risk that would exist with having everything in one company? And as we look out, what if that were to go down, like dramatically? And of course, you know, they both said, yeah, but you know, that's what got me here. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's called the accumulation phase.
Yeah.
Now, listen, we're in the distribution phase. If we start distributing from something and it goes down 20, 30, 40, 50%, which in this case, both of those companies did at that time. This was in the 90s, early 2000s. And we had the conversation, let's diversify. Do you know what the response was? It was, but what about capital gains taxes? At that time, capital gains taxes were 28%. The anchoring bias kept them from making the right investment decision because the tax was anchoring them into not acting.
And think about how many other financial decisions. Here's one, maybe it'll be simpler as the metaphor. What about the home, right? You say, well, I could sell my home for a gain. One of the reasons we're anchored to is think of all the costs of moving and listing and being in a different, so we anchor ourselves to whatever that security might be, basing it on our initial reaction or the first information we have, and we're never willing to let that thing go.
We tend to look at this very small piece of information versus looking at the big picture.
All right, here's another information one, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, by the definition, and I'm using it loosely, but I've read this one a long time. that you look for things that confirm what you already believe and disregard any of the other opposing information that's out there. There's a lot of different places.
Alphabet soup, Google.
Yeah.
Like the Google algorithm is actually doing this for you. It knows what your opinion is on certain things, and so when you search it, it gives you information back that you actually already believe. It is a confirmation bias machine. That is so easy to fall into that trap because, for example, I think annuities are bad. I put in, are annuities bad? It tells me annuities are bad. It literally, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's like, okay, I understand that there is bad annuities. There's bad people that sell annuities. There's people who have annuities that shouldn't. But $385 billion last year went into annuities, so they're good for somebody.
Right, right. Creating that private pension plan. So it's about almost becoming an art form that's very hard to exist anymore. Is being that journalist and looking for both sides of the information and being open to both sides of it. But when
you mean fair and balanced?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the news.
There
it's
is
fair
that
and
one.
balanced. Yeah, I mean.
Correct, but you can do this with securities as well.
Right.
If you're in favor of something like Bitcoin, then you'll look for articles that support it. If you're in favor of getting your money out of the market, you'll find hundreds of articles that support what you want. So how do you take away the bias? Look, you might out there want to actually do research and information. How do you keep your bias out in making decisions?
Well, I think it starts with having somebody who doesn't have a bias. That's one of the things that I think our clients look to us for, is for us to give them facts, to give them the good and the bad. Every idea that you have about retirement has a positive and a negative outcome. It's a matter of weighing those. You don't know what you don't know. So when I sit down with a client and they say, hey, I own this and this is good, I will agree with them. Yes, that indeed has done well. It is good. My question is it the best? Because that's what I deserve. That's where I want my money to be, not in what is good or appropriate, but what is the best thing for me. It's the very definition of the fiduciary rule, Spike.
Right, and when it's very similar to a doctor or a nursing staff.
Sure.
They care about you, but they're also agnostic. They have to give you advice for what's in your best interest, whether you want to hear it or not. And if you don't want to have your biases get in the way of your own decision, you've got to have somebody who's both unbiased, yet has a responsibility by the way they're licensed to give you advice in your best interest.
Because that doctor, to solve a health issue, there may be 3 different medications that he can choose. But what is he going to do? He's going to look at the health history. He's going to look at the severity of what your problem is. He's going to tell you, you know, we could do this medication, but it has these negative outcomes. He's going to allow you to understand that. That is exactly what we do. We just do it with retirement planning.
Right. Folks, you can get your own retirement blueprint right now. We're going to continue to talk about ways that our emotions get in the way of us making good financial decisions for ourselves, our own personal biases that you don't even realize are there. We're going to discuss more of them when we get back. But the retirement blueprint, it is your blueprint for retirement. Income planning, tax planning, how much risk are you taking, too much or too little to accomplish your goals? Estate planning conversations, medical conversations, long-term care, Social Security, how and when to take it. Those are just some of the elements of your retirement blueprint that you can claim right now. Get started on it by calling the phone number right down here on the bottom of the screen. More with Tim Lofton right after these important messages from Tim himself, a philosophy about the firm.
It goes back actually when I was 11 years old. That was the first time I discovered what not having money felt like. I remember being in Sunday school class and one of the parents came in to let us know that the ski trip, which was kind of a rite of passage at 12, was coming up. And so I got my permission slip and class got out and I was that kid. I was like running through the church and up the stairs and weaving in and out of people and got into the sanctuary, and I looked at the very back of the sanctuary and I saw my mom, and she was there with 2 or 3 other ladies and they were talking. And I took off at a dead sprint and I'm waving this piece of paper and talking a mile a minute, and I get to her and she's like, wait honey, what is it that you're saying? And I said, Mom, I said I can go. Like, I'm gonna be 12, I can go. And she's like, go to what? I'm like, the ski trip, the youth group ski trip. And I'll never forget, she got down on one knee And she wrapped her arms around me and she said, baby, she said, we can't afford that this year. And it wasn't the disappointment of not being able to go on the trip. It was the look in her eyes that she couldn't afford it and that she couldn't do that for me. And I really think that that put me on the path of having a heart for helping people get to retirement, to be able to stay retired and to live their best life. And that all starts with advice. And that's what I chose to do for a living. When interest rates are low, you might be able to refinance your home, your car, even your credit cards. Yet when interest rates go up, it may make sense to refinance your retirement. Higher interest rates could provide income opportunities you may not be aware of. Find out if a retirement refi could work for you. Call now to claim your complimentary Refi Your Retirement review.
Welcome back. This is the Retirement Blueprint Show with retirement income specialist Tim Lofton of Axum Planning and Wealth. Behavioral biases, the kinds of things in the behavioral finance, the things that get in the way of us making good financial decisions for ourselves. We're going through some of the definitions and, more importantly, examples that Tim has experienced himself with folks who have come into the office. Loss aversion bias. Loss aversion bias is the tendency to avoid losses as opposed to acquiring gains. What does that mean to you? Who is that?
Simply put, I'm more afraid of losing $1,000 than I am rewarded by making $1,000. This happened all through 2008, 2009, 2010, where people held on to the bad that happened, and instead of looking at the opportunity that it created, they simply never re-engaged. They went to cash, the market went down 20, 30, 40%. They went to cash, they never got back in, the market recovered, they missed it because they were more concerned about losing more money than they were potentially gaining that money back. Even understanding history. You know, the market has never gone down and not come back and set a new high. Anytime in history, we know that. We have 200 years of history to look at, and yet it kept people anchored in fear and allowed them to not see the benefits of that market come back.
It's a reasonable question. I'm sure you asked this as well. We've talked about risk and risk tolerance and how we prefer to define it. But you can look at somebody who walks in, you say, how much are you willing to lose in your portfolio if there's a market pullback or a percentage? And when you hear the zero, do you have to work on that, or do you say, okay, I guess we're not going to have any gains? But when we've got a 30-year retirement, don't we have to look at least at some moderate gains in the investments?
Unless you have a lot of money, Spike, there has to be risk in part of the portfolio because I have to double my income every 20 years. I know that. I can't double my income every 20 years and not take any risk at all. It's a matter of taking appropriate risk. What allows the person in that loss aversion category to be able to transition into making the right decisions is using the giving jobs to the money strategy that we use in our office. They're worried about their income going down. It's not as much the principle, it's their ability to live their lifestyle. If we were able to give them a pleasing answer to their loss aversion bias of, you're not going to have any loss because this is guaranteed, they can easily transition into accepting some volatility on the money that they don't have to have and allowing it to do their thing. This is as much psychology as anything.
Right. All right, next one here on our behavioral bias is overconfidence bias. I'm sure you see this one. Now, here's the thing. For our viewers, I bet a lot of folks who watch our informational program here are because they are trying to learn what to do. They know that they don't know, right? And so you're watching the program, you're trying to get more information. But who is an example of the overconfidence bias? Basically, the tendency for an individual to believe that because they're the ones who are making the decisions, they're not going to make mistakes.
Well, because they get a false sense of security. I'll give you a couple examples. One is that person that just started investing in 2009. The market's at an all-time historical low, and then we go from 7,000 on the Dow to 14,000 on the Dow, and they're like, I got this. I got this. Like this is easy. We have had so many people come into our office during these bull market runs, like we've recently experienced, and have the confidence of, I don't really need any advice because I did this on my own and it all worked out. Well, it all worked out until it doesn't work out.
Right. What about the overconfidence bias with a couple? Let's say we've got and we say this lovingly, embracingly, the engineers, right? The engineers, they come in with their spreadsheets, they know what their gains have been, maybe even they're aware of things like expense ratios, and they know what market sectors they're in. What happens if something happens to them? They're confident in what their ability has been to put together that portfolio. What about when they hand it over to the spouse who's had no interest in this?
I see a deer in the headlights. It never fails. There's usually one person in the household that is good at the finance stuff. There's sometimes that other person who's either not engaged at all or lightly engaged, but that's just not their area of expertise. And so if they are thrust into that role, it's fear. And then that fear keeps them from doing anything. It pushes them into these other biases of, I can't make a decision because I don't know enough, so I'm going to do nothing. And that is as dangerous as being overconfident or underconfident.
All right. Now, one I know that our viewers have heard before is a herd mentality, right? The herd behavior and doing what everybody else is doing.
Do you have an electric car?
Yeah.
Everybody's got an electric car. You need to get an electric car, Spike. You don't have an electric car?
No, I don't.
I don't either, but we should get one.
Right.
Matt in our office has an electric car. He loves it.
Now, but you know what I've just read about? Electric car backup at charging stations. Because there's something about the fact when it gets up to about 80%, it takes a lot longer. It can almost take the same time to get up to 80% as it does from 80 to 100. So people are just lounging around at charging stations. So what you thought was going to be
the 80-20 rule is
80-20
alive and
rule.
well in the
Yeah.
recharging of our electric cars. I did not know that.
Yeah. Now, on the herd behavior, though, especially going back to our financial world, where are we seeing this most? Is this people who make the same elections at the workplace? Is this folks who watch certain channels and we start talking with the neighbors and we're all making the same investment decisions? Where does herd mentality really rear itself up today?
I think when I see the herd mentality in my office, a lot of times it's in the 401k, and there is a feeling that everybody in the office, all of my friends and coworkers are all doing this. They're doing the
biggest thing for me is I'm going to do up to the match.
Yeah.
I hear this across the country. I do the match. Are you doing more than the match? When are you going to start contributing more? The herd mentality is just doing what the match is.
Correct.
Is that going to get you to retirement?
Well, and that's the question that we have to ask, right? Because while the match may get you to retirement, the person sitting beside you may need twice that amount because the income need that they have in retirement is greater. This is where the planning comes in. And so anything that we classify as everyone does this and no one does that, we know for a fact, because I've had this conversation with the kids growing up, everyone doesn't do it, right? It's the old, if Johnny jumped off the bridge, would you jump off the bridge, Spike? And we have that tendency to follow versus vetting what we're following. Does that make sense? Is that the right thing for me? Herd mentality does not protect the individual. The individual has their own story, their own set of needs, and their own their planning requirements.
The firm Accent Planning and Wealth, they're registered as a fiduciary. The retirement blueprint, it's to sort of help you stay away from making emotional decisions. And it's fear or greed. Are we chasing after returns? Are we fearful about what's about to come up next? The idea of having a financial team behind you is to keep you from making decisions based on emotions only. You can base it on what your beliefs are, what you think might happen next, but when we start getting into things like herd mentality, timing the market, you can make really dangerous decisions. The retirement blueprint. Do you feel that it's more about numbers or about emotions when they come in?
That is a great segue. In fact, you actually stole that because I was going to say, you know how you beat these biases? With math. Math doesn't lie. And that is the best way that I have found to get away from those biases, those things that we think to be true. If the math doesn't support them, they're not true. I don't care how much you believe them. When we are able to sit down and look at a different potential outcome of a different scenario, and I'll give you one. We had a client in, they were currently invested in a 60-40 portfolio, which is kind of the standard that we hear out there, is that's the norm. 60% stocks, 40% bonds, 4% withdrawal rate, and they had a 68% chance that was going to work out. But they had 100% confidence in it until they saw that it was only a 68% probability of working.
Right. Folks, you can get your own retirement blueprint started right now. Work with a fiduciary team who has your best interests in mind. They will help you see some of the blind spots you might have when it comes to your own financial decisions. Call the phone number below. And another thing we're seeing with herd mentality is more Americans today are taking Social Security early because of the worry of it running out. Don't go anywhere. Watch this message from Tim Lofton about Social Security.
Social Security is easy, right? The question is, should I take it now or later? Well, there are dozens of ways that you can take Social Security if you're single, and hundreds if you're married. You've paid into the system for decades. Don't you want to make sure that you optimize your retirement income? Depending on how you've set up your other retirement accounts, your Social Security could either be tax-free or up to 85% taxable. It's not as simple as it might seem. So give us a call today. Let us uncomplicate Social Security for your retirement. Give us a call at 855-684-3485, or you can scan the QR code below to schedule your complimentary review.
Welcome back to the Retirement Blueprint Show with Tim Lofton of Axum Planning and Wealth. We're talking about some of the behavioral finance biases that sometimes affect the decisions you make. There are fields out there like psychology that have been around for hundreds of years. The same thing with behavioral finance. 7 decades worth of Nobel Prize winning economic research, and these biases affect the way that we make decisions.
100%.
Recency bias, the tendency to weight recent events more heavily than events from the past. When it comes to markets, how do you see this affect clients?
Well, look at inflation. We had almost no inflation for a decade and a half. I mean, very little rise in cost of living, to the point where we almost ignored it. Like, well, it's not even a thing because we haven't had it. Then, boom, we get kicked in the teeth with these unbelievable year-over-year growth rates in inflation, and now all of a sudden inflation's at the top of our head. Like, this is going to go on forever. We see that in the markets. The markets reach an all-time high. The recency bias says, well, that's going to just keep going. But what about 2008? Did we forget that? Because that will happen again. It always does. Markets repeat themselves. So the danger is that we get trapped in thinking that markets don't go up or that they don't ever stop going up.
Can we maybe even consider the last 20 years recency of the markets? I say that because the Gen Xers out there who are in their 50s, they're the next generation to be coming up to retirement. And think about how many downturns in markets they've seen. Are they investing more conservatively because they remember things like 2008? They can remember what happened in 2020. Even though we recovered back very quickly in 2020, the kind of recency of over a couple of decades has a lot of new investors right now investing a lot more conservatively. Is that dangerous?
This is where it gets complicated, Spike, because as I talk to clients who lived through 2008, remember, like, let's say that they're in my office and 2008 was for them, 25 years ago. Well, they were 25 years younger. They weren't concerned about that time. It didn't impact them the way that somebody retiring in 2008 experienced that. They have a different takeaway. Same stimulus, same markets, same experience, different outcome. Because in 2008, if I was 30 years old, all I know is I kept putting money in and it went to an all-time high and I made a ton of money. If I retired in 2008, I saw my portfolio drop 40%. Totally different experiences.
Right. So please don't let recent events, whether it's the election cycle that comes up every couple of years and there's always news and noise about that, the ups and downs of the weekly and the daily market. Sometimes you're thinking, I need to get out all the way to cash, or you get really excited and you overextend yourself. Don't let the recent events change your decision making when it comes to your investments. Make sure you've got a sound plan that's a 20-year, 30-year, 40-year plan, not based on the current news. This next one is really important, though, as well. Mental accounting. Mental accounting is the tendency to categorize your different kinds of money depending on its source or its purpose. The reason why this one's important to me is I think a lot of folks have just kind of a different picture of what their cash is compared to their investments, compared to their IRAs, to maybe a pension plan and that Social Security. And we just make decisions about which account we're going to take from first.
Right.
That's mental accounting, and I don't think that's healthy for a drawdown strategy.
Well, it's not, because I'm discounting the cost of taxation. I'm discounting the cost of where that money needs to go in the future. And so, for example, we talk about Roth IRAs, and somebody's like, well, I'm going to take the money out, it's tax-free, except that that's the most efficient vehicle I have. So many mistakes can be made by by relying on that mental accounting as our guide versus having a plan to dictate where we should make those decisions.
We spent half an hour of our show today kind of talking about behaviors and emotions, but we've said it before, personal finance, it's more personal than it is finance.
Right.
Would you believe it's a balance, putting together the numbers? As we say, math wins, math doesn't lie. We do the math and the numbers with the assets you have, but there is a lot of emotional care that you take with your clients. These are people you're going to know for hopefully the rest of their lives.
Well, our plan, I really believe, is 80% psychological and 20% actual execution, because the idea of having a plan takes away the fears, takes away the concerns, shows a path forward, explains exactly what we're going to do when certain things happen. That piece of it is peace of mind. What we do to actually execute on that isn't nearly as important as the comfort level in the plan, belief in the plan, and believing the math.
Depending on when you've seen our program here today, you can also join us on WHIO, the radio on the weekends. We do a full hour of retirement planning. Maybe we'll do some more behavioral biases there. But it really comes down to what you need to do for yourself, and that's get yourself started on a plan. The Retirement Blueprint, 20 seconds, Tim, before we go here. Tell folks what it's all about.
It's a written plan. It's designed for you, and it's customized to you and your family and what you're looking for. You bring in your box of puzzle pieces. We'll put them together. We will build a plan for you that will help you retire and stay retired.
Thank you so much, Tim. Folks, get started on your own Retirement Blueprint right now. Call that phone number down on the bottom of the screen. We'll have folks standing by, even though the program is wrapping up, to schedule your appointment and claim your own no-cost Retirement Blueprint. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week.